Hello, everyone, for our second stream of the day, our only official stream of the day. I only had that earlier stream because I was at the beholden schedule of the January 6th propaganda hearings. And so what can I do? But we made it through that one. And I think we're going to have a much, well, let's say more exciting, or at least more, no one's going to fall asleep, I hope, in the stream I'm about to do today, unlike the stream I did a little bit earlier. I think it's going to be much more interesting and hopefully not about politics at all. It'll be a nice little break. But guys, I've got a great guest that I'm going to be bringing on today. But before we get started, I have a really important and exciting announcement, which is the audio version of my book is back. Now, you might remember about a month and a half ago, the original audio version of my book, Actively Unwoke, got released. And when it got released, I discovered that it had accidentally been read by a woke leftist who sounded like she enjoyed the book about as much as you would expect that a woke leftist would enjoy a book about fighting back against the woke left. Well, as soon as so fun fact, if you ever write a book, you need to make sure you have final approval over the audiobook version. I did this. I let it go with my first book because I knew the person who was reading my first audiobook and it was fine and it was great. And so when it came to doing this audiobook, I didn't even think about demanding approval over the person who was reading it. And oh my God, did that backfire on me spectacularly. But luckily, I was able to convince my publisher to allow me to re-record the audiobook myself to make sure it was not read like the Crypt Keeper or an evil grandmother or the church lady or any of those things. And it is now available on Amazon and Audible, which of course Amazon owns Audible. And Judy has already been listening to it. She says, I've only listened to the introduction in chapter 1 of the new Audible recording of Actively Unwoke, but OMG, Carlin, it is a joy to listen to after the original. Night and day. Great job. Thank you, Judy, for that. I think it's significantly better than the last one. So guys, if you want to get your version, you can go ahead and do that. Now, if you purchased the previous version on Audible, you have two choices. Number one, you can return the previous version, get that credit back, and use that credit to purchase the new version. Or if you want to keep the previous version, which will now be like a collector's item, because I'm sure as heck going to make sure that never sees the light of day again, you can keep the previous version and then purchase it anew. But unfortunately, the new one isn't going to automatically replace the old one for reasons that I won't get into now. But you can return the old one to Audible if you just never want to hear of that version again and get your credit back and use that to purchase the new one. That might be the route that I would take. But if you want to keep it, it's up to you. You know, I can't tell you what to do. And of course, if you want to support my work, you can become a member of my locals community. We're actually doing a book club for people who purchased Actively Unwoke in locals. Not just in locals. You don't actually have to join locals in order to take part in it, but we will be doing it on Saturday at 3 p.m. All my locals community members get all sorts of exclusive perks like Zoom calls with me, access to the supporter-only Discord, being able to unlock all the functionality of the platform. So make sure you come and join us at kb.locals.com. You can join for $5 a month. You can also join for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can also make a one-time gift. All that goes to support the work I'm doing and keep this channel running. And of course, I really, really appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, I do have a fabulous guest coming on with me today. He is my favorite British journalist. His name is Andrew Gold. He has a great podcast and YouTube channel called On the Edge with Andrew Gold. He does really interesting videos. He has a whole documentary about an exorcism. He does videos about cults and all sorts of interesting things. And I definitely recommend you check it out. And his all his info is going to be in the description down below somewhere. Give it a subscribe. And he has come on to on today to talk about a really intriguing topic, which is we're going to talk about secrets and authenticity and shame and all those sorts of things. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. So without further ado, let me just switch my layout here. Welcome, Andrew, to the channel. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me. Did that really happen? I remember reading that with your on Twitter about your book. And how was she reading it then? Like, ugh, was it like that?
I cannot. She sounded like so my locals community started calling her the Wicked Witch of the West and have since upgraded to Crypt Keeper. That it really was that bad. And I got to tell, like, I woke up like the day the book came out and I listened to like 3 seconds of it. And I was like, I don't think this book is like that good. And this is not the way I would have read it at all. And then my community started complaining about it. And it was just a whole rigmarole. But
you should put that out, like bits of it as like a joke.
Well, I did, and then my publisher got very mad at me because apparently my community members because what happened is like my publisher did not understand that my community members investigate woke leftists for like fun, like it's like a group activity, and so they had already been investigating. They were like, "Who is this woman that sabotaged this audiobook?" They found out she was a professor at a really woke college in Oregon.
Oh my
Had all this stuff on her Facebook page, basically saying critical race theory is not in K through 12 schools, and all of these things that were like, this is absolutely a woke leftist. And so then apparently she got a few nasty emails, and so my publisher was a little upset at me for about 3.5 seconds before I was like, you guys let a woke leftist read my audiobook. You do not have the high ground here at all.
That's so funny. I guess like a lot of academics as well, because I recently had Professor Gad Saad on my channel, and he talks about like that, in academia, it's like 90% lefty, wokey stuff. So you just can't have, if you've got a book against woke stuff, which you talked about on my channel, didn't we? It was a fantastic episode, but you can't be having professors reading it out.
No, and you could tell she was definitely not happy. She was literally hissing in the book. She was so unhappy. So I have remedied that situation, and sometimes it just takes a little extra time to fix problems like that.
Does sound a bit funny though.
But you're writing a book right now. You're writing a book about secrets.
Yeah, I don't know what the name of it is yet, but I'm already halfway through it. It's got a publisher and everything, and somebody suggested the other day, actually, Juicy, because it's about secrets, and somebody said, "Oh, that sounds very juicy," and they said, "Oh, that should be the name of the book, Juicy: The Psychology of Secrets," or something like that.
I like that a lot. That's really intriguing. You could have some fun with the marketing around that too.
Yeah, maybe like a sort of salacious-looking fruit that looks all sort of dripping, or maybe a mouth like the Rolling Stones' tongue.
Yeah, well, actually, my coach, and I do a show with him weekly on my channel, Joshua. We just did a workshop last night about how strawberries are like an inherently sexual fruit, and how you can eat strawberries to like capture the man of your dreams or something like that. And so that might be a nice fruit for your book cover.
Yeah, but you know what? Once I was in Brazil, because I was living in Brazil, and I had some strawberries and I ate some, and then I looked down and all the strawberries had little tiny worms that were going in and out of them, and I'd just eaten half of one. So I don't know about strawberries now. I get a bit funny with them since then.
You might have to find it or something like that. I don't know. Grapes would be pretty good. Grape, just some might say juice.
Yeah. Am I losing you a bit? I'm losing your Wi-Fi a bit, or is it mine?
Yeah. I don't know. It definitely broke up for a second, but don't touch anything because it seems to be working now. So we'll pray. The YouTube was glitching earlier on my earlier stream, so it might actually be YouTube. Who the heck knows? But Sam says, so the audiobook reader, she threw her voice to the back of her throat and nose. Yeah, I guess she did, Sam. And George says, as Alex correctly stated, she was reading the book. Yes. Okay, guys, we're not going to talk about the book anymore because I want to have a nice conversation today. We're putting that bad memory away for the moment. But I want to talk about, so one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think that this might coincide with your book too, is that, when I started my YouTube journey like a couple years ago, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I originally started my channel to talk about like the workplace and psychology, which is, kind of like what I'm supposed to be doing professionally, I guess. And then a couple months, or not even months, a couple weeks after I started my channel, I accidentally went viral on the internet for this politics stuff. And so all of a sudden I had like thousands and thousands of subscribers to my channel that didn't come for the reason I originally started it. And so I was like, okay, what do I do with this? And I basically decided that I wanted to document an authentic human experience in just a really odd like situation, which is all of a sudden being like a known person in the world for changing your mind and having this adventure where I was meeting all of these like really like interesting people and doing these things that are just out of the ordinary. And I was like, I just want to document an authentic human experience. I didn't want it to be about me reading the news. I didn't want it to be about, me presenting like a narrative to people. I wanted to do that stuff because I like doing that stuff and I like commentating on it, but I also wanted to be able to show emotion and show the ups and downs of what this thing is. And, I think one of the most challenging things for me in the last year has been trying to maintain a level of authenticity in a land in which image is really everything. And people are just so finicky about like, you can't say, how dare you say that thing or use that tone or what have you. And so I thought like the idea of authenticity and shame and like why people don't necessarily present their true self might be an interesting topic of conversation.
It absolutely is. I mean, do you think authenticity is even? Firstly, is it possible? Because do you get that thing, and maybe you don't actually, because you appear to have an unlimited amount of stamina in terms of how long you can do this. But when I come off after doing a long stream, often I do, Sean Atwood's show on Wednesdays. It's 4 hours, so it's just long. And I come off and my face hurts and my brain hurts and everything hurts. And I think that comes from, it hurts in a way that it doesn't hurt if I'm just sitting talking to my girlfriend or a friend of mine at home. So I guess there is some part at the back of my head that without meaning for me to turn, I don't mean to turn it on, but it is aware that it is performing. And I'm trying as hard as I can to be me. And I guess you're doing that as well. And many of us are trying to be what we would call authentic. But, what we don't get ever is real authenticity. And that's what Instagram was supposed to be.
That's failed colossally in that regard.
I know. And so I did some research, and there's loads of these little apps that have not really taken off in any big way, but there are often apps that come out and market themselves as the anti-Insta. And there's one, for example, called Be Real. And what happens is, like, once a day, your phone will vibrate and you get like a 1 minute window or a 2 minute window to take a picture with the front and back of your phone. But that's still not really authentic, because you still have those 2 minutes to prepare. You know that's going to happen. And if you happen to have been picking your nose in that moment, you're not going to click yes on that bit. You're still going to look good. So that's not authenticity. There was another one that was like a browser app, something in your browser that does just at some point during the day when you open a new tab, it snaps a snapshot of your face.
But, oh God, I would hate that.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the results were really boring, because it was just mostly people just looking like they were clicking a tab, which is not that interesting to look at after the first day. So we feel like we are looking for this kind of inauthentic, this authenticity that we're not sure really exists. And then when we do finally actually get something that gets close to it, it's a bit boring. So would you say that authenticity, that it even exists as a thing? Because you're probably different with different people to an extent as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. I think that there's definitely an aspect to when I'm streaming, especially, I do try to, I wouldn't say I'm being inauthentic, but I do try to like turn it on a little bit. And there are definitely times when like I might be having a bad day or something like that, but I'm like, okay, got to do a stream, got to be happy for like 2 hours, like go put on some makeup, like cover up whatever you can. And so there is definitely a performance aspect to it. And I think that especially when I do long streams, because I'm doing these streams on Saturdays now where I'm basically like complaining about other people on the internet, which is probably not the healthiest thing in the world to do, but I'm focusing some energy in that direction. Like, I mean, we'll go for 5, 6, 7 hours on these streams, and it's a lot. And it's, I definitely, like, when I get off the stream, I'm like, oh my God, like, I can't do it anymore. But I think, I don't know. And even, you're also making me think about the fact that, I tend to play different characters in different environments. So I play a very different character on Twitter than I do in other places. I'm a little bit more of like, I don't really care what you think. I'm going to be like a tough, like badass on Twitter, because I kind of like sometimes playing that role. And I wouldn't say it's inauthentic, but I would say that it's like, it is very specific to that platform. I think human beings are multifaceted. Like, we all have different aspects of ourselves. Sometimes we might be like the bad bitch, and sometimes we might be like, a little bit more softer and a little bit more empathetic. And I do like playing with these different aspects of my personality on different platforms. But it is a question of like, what is really authentic? And I think that for me, a couple of weeks ago, I basically had an emotional breakdown online. It was really fun. And I thought, why not just live this out in the public and just see what happens? And so I basically did this stream where I was like crying for an hour about like how much this sucks and I hate it and I just want to quit. And so I do try to show when I'm having those really bad moments, I do actually try to show that, because I want to show that diversity of perspective. Like, no, this isn't as great sometimes as like people think it is, that like want to be these like YouTube stars. It's like, it really is very difficult. And I think how I've kind of, how I think about it, I guess, is if I'm having things that that don't conform to the story arc of what people want my story to be. I want to show those moments. I want to show the good moments and the happy moments and the exciting moments. And I also want to show the bad moments and the hard moments and the moments where I am crying. And at least it might not be a perfect representation of who I am, but I think it's where I'm at right now, I guess.
Yeah, it's the crying one's a really interesting one, especially from a man's perspective, because I don't know if it's a biological evolutionary function or whether it's a social thing with men that they don't often cry. And I am able to cry for some reason, and a lot of men share this actually with me, that they can cry in a silly movie. It doesn't even have to be a sad moment. It can be a beautiful moment, or it can just be the music gets you just right and you find yourself, a lone tear will escape and just go down my face. And it feels great. But in real life, when real bad things happen, it's impossible for me to cry. I can get sad and I can talk about my emotions, but I can't cry. And one of the problems is it's almost like it's gotten to a point where I'd love to be able to experience that. So when the crying does start, it's like, oh, my tears are tearing up. There's going to be a cry. I start to get happy, like, oh, yes, I'm going to cry. And that negates the crying, the emotion that leads to the crying. And the point being, I'm too I can't be in the moment. I'm too aware of the crying. I think people have that with stuff like sex as well. You're you can't get in the moment because you're thinking about the thing that's happening. And if you're crying on a stream, you're at some part of your mind, you are aware. Okay, I initially started crying because I'm sad, and I'm still sad, and that's what I'm not being false by any means, but I am sort of trying to show these people that this is the real. Do you know what I mean? It sort of becomes this meta joke almost with your brain. It's mad.
I totally understand what you're saying, because in real life, it is actually very difficult to get me to cry over. I have like very masculine energy in this regard. I cry over almost nothing. And I think the stream I did a couple weeks ago, I was pushed to quite literally a breaking point where I couldn't get out of bed anymore for like a couple of days. It got really bad.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean, I guess it is what it is. I was, it actually, it got me a lot of like really nice letters and comments and things though. So that actually was very, very helpful. But I think, the point I'm making is it was almost like I wasn't expecting to cry when I did that stream. It was just it was like I'd been pushed to a point of like, I could not take it anymore. But there is something to be said for the fact that I was very aware, like, okay, I'm crying on the internet. Great. Like this is, and so there were certainly like parts of me that were like, you know what it was though? It was like, there were parts where I was like trying to prevent myself from crying and I couldn't, or there were parts where I was maybe, if anything, I was actually trying to stop myself because I was like, I don't want to cry on the internet. This is awful. And it wasn't the intention of the stream, but it just kind of came out that way. But looking back at it, it was like, I guess part of me questioned why would I have to get pushed to the point of like literally physically breaking to be able to even express these emotions. I don't know. And regardless of whether I was doing it in a public place or or crying in my bedroom by myself, it's like one of those things that I almost think like, it's almost like we're our own worst judge, aren't we? Like why, I mean, for people who can't cry or have struggle crying, like there's nothing wrong with crying objectively. But it's almost like you prevent yourself from doing it because I don't know, is it like a letdown to yourself? I don't know what it is.
There's definitely that thing, and I think this is men and women. There's a thing when you're at high school or whatever, if you show that something has gotten to you, if people are making fun of you and you show that it hurt you, you've lost. So there is a bit of that, and you sort of train yourself from the age of 13 or 14. The worst thing you could do, even as a child, 7 or 8 or 9 years old or whatever at school, is to accidentally, start crying or to call the teacher your mum or something. I remember nearly doing that, and then just as I was about to, I don't know why that was. I had this urge when I was about 7 to go, mum. It stayed with me because a kid did it just before I did, and I went, oh, thank God that wasn't me, and that kid's life was ruined. It's really apt what happened to you, because one of the things I've been researching for this book, because it's about secrets and it's a lot about authenticity and the internet and the ways that we, it's about secrets, and we keep the secret us away from the internet and who we are. And by the way, anyone who wants to get this book, you can't, because it's not out for like a year and a half, but get me on the Edge with Andrew Gold, and then you'll know when it's coming out. But I've tracked down the very first blogger. I went and found who was the first person ever to have a blog and basically to do what you and I do. Who was the first person ever to sort of be able to do that. And of course, you can look at talk show hosts and stuff back in the 50s and 60s, and were they doing it? And there's this thing called parasocial interaction, which we can talk about later, but that's that relationship between the talk show host or the blogger or the YouTuber and the audience. And it's this very strange relationship that we have. But the first blogger was apparently, there was a guy called Justin Hall in about 1991 or 92. And he had a really difficult upbringing. He's a really, really fascinating guy. And he had this difficult upbringing because when he was 8 years old, his dad killed himself, shot himself in the family home. And after that, Justin began looking for some sort of paternal figure or some people to tell him who he should be and that kind of thing, which, probably sounds familiar. 1991, 92, he became, the internet started kicking off, and there were like 500 websites in the world at that time. So it was just this fascinating time. And he made a blog called links.net because what he did was he collected lots of links. So every weekend he would browse the entire internet, which was like a few hundred websites. And then he would just put links of like his favorite little, places to go. Now, this being the internet, even back in 1992, a lot of the links were porn, right? So he would just put up these links to porn and stuff like that. But some of it was other stuff. And those were the most popular ones, by the way. That's what everyone clicked on. And you remember, it would be a page that would take like a day to load of like some picture of a naked person or something like that. But Justin got really, really into it. He became like the darling of the internet. He was traveling the world. He was like this modern influencer. But when he started, I've got his quote, what he wanted more than anything, because he didn't have this, he had this hole left from where his father had been. And he said, what would happen if you went all the way, being radically honest, totally transparent, exposing yourself to distant strangers? Why would anyone want to do that? And that's how he starts. He made a little video about his history. So he wanted exactly what you want. He wanted that authenticity, and he wanted to really, really feel that connection and be himself. And 5 or 10 years down the line, he ended up doing one of those videos. I mean, do you remember that Britney one? There was a guy who did that one about Britney. Leave Britney alone.
Yes.
So it was the same year as that. I think it was 2005, and it was almost identical in sort of tone and theme and how it looked. And he was just saying something along the lines of, I just want to connect and no one's listening and people don't like when I give away their secrets and tell people. And he was crying his eyes out, screaming and crying, and just this mad thing. And I wonder, given your experience and his and how similar they are, if there is something in that pursuit of being authentic on the internet, and is it unfortunately destined to fail and to end up in this kind of misery?
I mean, I almost think it is. And it's like, I have so many questions about this, because the first question I have is there even any value in attempting to document an authentic human experience? Because is that something that people are even interested in? And, I used to study a lot of like American history. And so I read a lot of like really like old biographies that were written in like the 1700s and the 1800s of people documenting their life experience. And something I've thought a lot about is, who is writing these sorts of things now? Because now, like when historians 100 years from now look back, what are they going to be using to assess what it was like to be a human being in this time period? Well, they're going to be using social media and websites and videos of these things that aren't real. Like none of this is real. It's not speaking to emotions. It's not speaking to the core of who we are as people. And it's just going to be like this plastic version of history. And so do people even want to understand what a human experience is, or what goes on in like the inner workings of people's minds? I don't know the answer to that.
That's why Samuel Pepys' diary, I think it was the 1800s or 1700s, is so valuable to us, because obviously loads of people were writing around that time, mostly fiction, but there was non-fiction. There were rules of etiquette and all that stuff, which was probably the equivalent of the Instagram stuff. That was the facade, how one must be in public. It was all that stuff. But Samuel Pepys was this guy who wrote a diary, so it wasn't meant for distribution. People weren't supposed to read it. This was just for him. And some of the stuff in there is so fascinating. I mean, the thing that stands out that I'll always remember, and I'll never forget this, is that he used to masturbate in church, but he managed to do it using only his mind. He trained his mind to be able to achieve climax in church while listening to the pastor or the priest or whatever. And sometimes it would be, there was one particular moment, there was a daughter of his friend was doing a speech or something in church, and he did it at that moment, and you get the shame afterwards as well that he feels, and he's really distraught about it. But so that's a real look. And even that has some filter, because he's probably deluding himself in some ways. He's not being entirely honest with himself. But that's as close as we can get. But we don't have cameras in people's houses. It's why we love reality TV shows, because we like to think that that's how people really are. We want to know. Look, if we're at home, doing things that are embarrassing in public, we want to know, does everyone else do that? Am I weird? Am I strange? Are people masturbating as much as me? Are they picking their nose as much as me? And I did a survey for my book, because it's about, secrets and stuff. So I did a survey of stuff like that. And again, people are not going to be totally honest, because nobody trusts these quizzes, even though I couldn't see anyone's names. And so one of the things I start with is looking at things that are similar. How do you define what a secret is? And you can look at what it's not and what it's similar to. And it's similar to deception, so lies. Not all secrets involve lies, but all lies in some way do involve secrets. The other thing is privacy or privacy. And what is private and what is secret? So is it, if a couple has sex, is that private or a secret? To me, that's just private, right? You expect that a couple might have sex. They're just keeping that private. It's not a big secret if it comes out. Now, ironically, if a couple never has sex, that starts to become a secret, because we have societal expectations that couples have sex. So if they don't, we get this feeling, probably wrongly, that something must be wrong because of our societal expectations. So it's this really fascinating thing, picking your nose. I love that one, because my survey showed that 97% of people feel they do it frequently. So the fact that you do it should just be a private matter, not something that's secret, not something that if it comes out that you do it, it's incredibly embarrassing. And yet we all act like nobody does it, like it's this horrible thing. And there was a football manager of Germany, the manager or coach, who got caught during a match, on the side. He was picking his nose and eating the stuff. And then he was also, unfortunately, he kept putting his hands down his trousers and smelling his fingers, which was it's a bit horrible to watch. But it's so unfair on him, because obviously he was so in the moment that he just forgot that cameras were everywhere. And it was a rare moment, a rare look into that. If you want to see authenticity, find the German coach who did that. That is a moment where he's just being him, even with the cameras on him. So yeah, it's a shame that we all portray this sort of fake us to the world, because it means that when we are picking our noses at home, when we are doing embarrassing things, we feel like no one else is, and we feel a lot of shame, and that's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a perfect example. And I kind of was a little embarrassed for that guy when you were talking about it, not necessarily because of what he did necessarily, but because I know exactly what he must have experienced from, letting his guard down in those moments to to do that on camera, and then the backlash to that, and probably what he still experiences today with those videos being on the internet and living forever, right? It's
Awful.
I mean, I'm fully well aware every time I do a video, and I'm obviously not the most famous person in the world, and I'm not on an international sports screen, but I'm fully well aware of every time I say something that might be an awkward joke or anything like that, when I'm just kind of talking off of my head, oh, that's going to get clipped out of context. Someone's going to use that against me later. Yeah. And it's it really does impact how you express yourself and whether or not you're fully able to step into who you are. And I've done this stream before where I talk about when I joined the libertarians and started immersing myself in libertarian culture, it actually made me more creative than I've ever been in my life, because within libertarian culture, there's just not as much direct judgment of that stuff, at least in what I experienced in New Hampshire. So you have all these kind of weird, awkward, creative people that are all doing different things and all having these conversations that just don't take place in Republican cultures or Democrat cultures or normal society, but they do take place in these libertarian clubs and these libertarian gatherings. And so for me, that was a really a community that I felt brought out the weirder side of me. And then when I start to express some of those things on the internet, it's instantly clipped out of context and taken and twisted by people who don't like me because I, didn't speak their Republican talking points or whatever. And I'm like, I'm just living an authentic human experience, man. I just had a thought off the cuff on a live stream, and you guys are turning this into something it's not. And it's really aggravating when those things happen.
Yeah, that is difficult. And you and I both delve into really controversial terrain sometimes. I think part of why we do this job is we're probably those people. I don't know. I mean, are you like this? That I wouldn't, I'm not an extrovert because I don't like going out in big groups. But if I'm with one or two friends, by the end of the night, I start to sense that they might be quite tired and ready to go home. And I'm just like fully on like a subject and as controversial as it can be, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely think that that's true, and I'm an introvert as well. I cannot be around big crowds of people, or even just like
Yeah.
several people for an extended period of time. But I definitely find that it makes people what I found is that like what if I'm acting like I would in like a libertarian clubhouse around like people who are more Republican and conservative, they are visibly uncomfortable. And I'm like, why is it okay to do that over here and not over here? And why like what about the development of people allowed something to be so completely socially acceptable and fine and not even just socially acceptable, but like lifted up and said like this is awesome in this one culture, but when you
Hmm.
interact with these people over here, it is like no, we don't do that, we don't say that. It's just a really weird thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it just shows what nonsense everything is. Like a lot of societal norms are really, really subjective, and they'll be completely different. But that's also why I get wound up with some people from different cultures where like spitting is more allowed because I was
Oh.
brought up with this sense of like no spitting on the floor, you know, that kind of
Mhm.
thing, and it offends me. And some of these societal norms, I think I'm right in saying, because I'm not a scientist here, but I wrote an article about offense and the things that offend us and are revolting to us. And like with language, for example, I think it's on the, I don't know which side it is, but let's say it's the left side of your brain is where language is. But swear words are on the right side of your brain. They're totally different, even though it's still language. They're on the other side of your brain because it's where the offense bit is. It's where you get like, oh, I don't like that. And those things get ingrained into us from a young age. And I imagine that's not just swear words. Obviously, you live in a society right now where saying certain swear words is bad. And it gives you, but it could be anything that some sort of, spitting will do that, will have the same effect. If I see someone spit on the floor, it will have that effect that some people will get when they hear a bad swear word. And it's really interesting seeing how swear words change, firstly, depending on what country you're in, what kind of swear words they are. But also over the last few hundred years, you can track how offensive words have changed with society. So you can go from, I guess a few hundred years ago, it was religious words. So stuff like damn and hell and heck and eternal damnation and all that. And you've got these really weird, particularly Americanisms that they used in Rugrats. So carnation or something that the grandpa used to say. And that was the worst thing you could say. And it sounds silly to us now, but at that time, it would have been, like saying the N word or something to them. That's how that would have felt. And then as society sort of got a little bit less religious focused, they moved on to the body. That was sort of the Victorian Puritanism, this whole thing of like a maiden must be a virgin and sex and, talking about sex and all that kind of stuff. So you moved on to all these bodily words, just talking about sex or saying, fuck, shit, ass, cunt, whatever. And so I'm wary of your YouTube channel being taken.
That's okay.
That's,
I've said cunt before on my channel. It's fine.
good, because cunt is the one that's still, it's the one bodily word that stayed, and there's a reason for that. Because the next thing that came from the body, now people don't care about fuck and shit. They don't care. They pretend they do. No one cares anymore. We moved on to identity words. Identity became the thing that was the unsayable words. And the reason cunt is a bad one is because, particularly in the States, it's linked to misogyny. It's supposed to be. So it's against women. It's an identity word. In the UK, you use it to describe a man, and that's why it's allowed here. It's anyone. I would just say to a friend, "Yo, you fucking cunt," like all the time. But I probably wouldn't say it to a woman because I'd be wary of that potential, misinterpretation or whatever. But if you think about the words you really can't say today, they're all identity groups. The F word for gay people and the N word. There are a couple of Jewish equivalents. There are other ones for Muslims and things. These are the unsayable words. The interesting thing about it is, as you're saying before about like what is offensive or whatever, it changes depending on where you are, and it will change again. And I spoke to John McWhorter, who's a linguist, sort of anti-woke linguist, on my channel ages ago. And I said, what do you think's next? And he said, you never know. We won't know what's going to be the next thing in 50 years. But for example, it could be anything. It could be like related to climate change. You could call someone a windmill or something, and like people will get upset. So it's fascinating to see where this is going to go. But it's also maybe a reason to sometimes just like take ourselves a little less seriously, not just about offensive words, but about societal norms and about transgressing them and doing things that are silly and embarrassing and rude. Because in 50 years' time, that will just be a normal thing to do, or it might not.
Well, we have a question from Sam, and this is actually an area that I've thought about as well in regards to this. And I think you're an atheist, right? Okay. So I'm not an atheist, but I don't subscribe to any like traditional religious belief. I'm more of a generalized spiritualist. Sam says, do you think people crave authenticity because their connection to God universe changes when they transition from spiritual being to physical being? I mean, I think that there's something to that, at least from my belief system. It's like, and I've gotten in trouble for talking. I've even gotten in trouble for talking about my spiritual beliefs, because people really don't want to hear those. But I think there's something to that. I think that we have a soul that I think our soul wants to express itself. I think that, I've said it a million times, our ability to express ourselves with our physical voice directly relates back to our self-worth. And that's not a spiritual concept, that's a psychological concept. But there's a reason that expression leads to us feeling good about ourselves. Or if we don't feel good about ourselves, we're not as inclined to express what we believe, because maybe we don't think that what we believe is valuable. We don't think that what we believe is even worth someone would even care about what we have to say, so we kind of just keep it to ourselves. And so I think there is a certain amount of like, we're feeding our soul when we express ourselves. And what happens when we feel like that expression is stifled because of the judgment that we might experience for expressing what are really not controversial beliefs at all, but you're doing it in a context in which everyone is going to judge every single thing that you say.
Yeah, well, it creates a lot of shame, and shame's different to guilt, I think, because guilt you can use to sort of spur yourself on. You can say like, I feel guilt about what I've done, I'm going to rectify it. Where shame is this really internal, just consuming feeling of dread and just worthlessness and stuff. And I think that does come from, as you're suggesting, it's a misalignment between things you think and feel and what the society happens to think at a particular moment. What's really difficult, and I can feel us moving on accidentally, because I know you said no politics, but we're going to get
okay.
onto
We can
woke
talk
stuff.
about politics. That's fine.
We're going to get onto woke stuff. I know it. Just because you never know until 50 years later, just like I was saying about offense or whatever, what's going to be like, what was a good idea and what was a bad idea. So much stuff comes up and it changes every 5-10 years. There's a new like thing that society latches onto. And Ricky Gervais said at his recent stand-up gig, he was saying, nobody could have imagined 10 years ago that the most offensive thing you could say on Twitter would be, women don't have penises. That's now the most offensive thing you can say. And now anybody who thinks, well, women don't have penises is going to feel a little bit of shame, is going to feel a bit of like, oh, why am I out of whack with everyone? What they don't realize is a lot of people are thinking, well, hang on, this isn't a scientific way of thinking. This doesn't sound right. But nobody can stick their head above the parapet and say what they're really thinking. So everybody feels very alone, just like they do when they pick their noses, just like they do when they get offended by particular things or not. And I don't think it's good. It's stifling free expression, but it's also making a lot of people feel very lonely and ashamed right now.
I've often thought that I think that the easiest cure to wokeness in our society is just to get people to speak up and say, this is nonsense. And if every single person that thought that it was nonsense just spoke up right now, every single thing we were experiencing would be over in an instant. And it's not that people still couldn't have their personal beliefs and believe that women can have penises. I'm not going to register a judgment on that because I don't want to get my YouTube channel taken down. But it is one of those things that like we literally as a collective, if we just decided to change this right now, all it would require is everyone who believed a certain thing to speak up and say that thing, and it would be over and done with. And yet people are still really reticent to do it. And, another thing I've thought about as a cure for wokeness is just personal empowerment. And again, feeling like, helping people to feel like what they have to say is valuable enough that they're willing to speak up and go out on a limb and say, no, this is what I believe. And if you believe the same thing, then come and join me over here.
Unfortunately, it depends on what your job is, because I've started feeling the same way as you. And the thing is, my whole thing was I was supposed to be like the guy in the middle. I guess a lot of people start feeling that way. And it's almost like people who say like, I don't have an accent, because they feel like their thing is the middle. So I felt like my thing was the middle, but I tried, I felt like, oh, I have this sort of voice that's quite softly spoken, and I'll speak to people who are on the right and the left. And as I'm going on, I do find myself getting angrier and wanting to speak up more against the woke stuff in particular. And a lot of it comes down to what you're saying now. It's just like, well, if I don't speak up against it, then who will? How can I expect others to start to do it? And I'll just sit on the sidelines. Well, that's no good. I used to sit in classes at school, and they would talk about slavery. They would talk about the Holocaust in history classes. And I used to sit there like daydreaming, like many of us did, with a bit of a hero complex of like, God, I wish I was back there because I would have stood up against it. I would have done. And what we didn't realize when we're thinking that is that back in the 1930s to say like, hey, I stand with these Jewish people. Well, that's a bit like today going on Twitter and saying, those things that will make you unpopular and lose your friends. It's even worse actually, because they would have taken you and shot you. So absolutely, I wouldn't have said a word. I'm Jewish myself, but even more reason not to say a word. I'd have just hidden and gotten the hell out of there and hoped that I survive. The same with slavery. Yeah, I could have come out and said, slavery's bad, this looks bad. But firstly, I probably wouldn't have thought that if I was born in that time period. And secondly, would I have been brave enough to come up? So I thought, if I can't even say this, if I'm worried I can't even, this is nowhere near as important as or as big or as scary as slavery and the Holocaust. It is dangerous though, but it's nowhere near those levels. The ramifications anyway of speaking up. I thought, well, surely I've got to start doing that. I've got to start tweeting things, just be a bit more honest. And it's okay because I make my living myself now. Through my podcast, me and you are able to do that. I've had messages from a lot of people who have had, just typical normal, office jobs, and their manager or boss has seen stuff they've written on Twitter or whatever, and they've been fired, and then they can't put food on the table for their families. So it's one thing for me and you to say that everyone needs to stand up, but unfortunately, it's such a bigoted, bullying tribe, that sort of woke thing, that it's very, very difficult for most normal people to do that. So we've got to do it even more, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a line in my book where I say that if you ever had any questions about what you would have done during 1930s Germany or during the civil rights movement, then what you're doing right now is exactly what you would have done then. And, but I do understand why people with kind of like quote unquote normal jobs, they're reticent to speak up. After I had my breakdown, I was talking with my husband and he's like, Carlin, why don't you just go get a normal job? And I said, Victor, I think that ship has sailed. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that now. Partially because I don't actually want to go into an office and have a normal job. I think I would sooner shoot myself in the foot. But also just because of the things that I have said online, I think it would be extremely difficult to get hired for like your normal kind of job. But I do think that people who can speak up do have that extra obligation to speak up because, if you're self-employed, if no one can fire you, then what is holding you back? And I thought a lot about you did this one interview where you talked with a literal psychopath. And you said that there was like freedom in talking to a psychopath because you knew you weren't going to be judged by that psychopath, even though you were doing it on the internet. But you found a certain level of freedom in that. Why can't people find that level of freedom just in kind of like the normal world that you were able to find talking to a literal kind of like person with a mental disorder?
Well, we're social creatures, and we're just. It makes sense that these things are so important to us because obviously we evolved over 200,000 years in tribes, and those tribes were about social cohesion. Apparently, at the start, we used to groom each other, not in the way that everybody's saying grooming now on Twitter, but grooming is in like cleaning one another. That was a way that our tribes stuck together. But once we got larger than sort of 80 or so people, it became too time consuming to go around sort of licking each other's hair or whatever. And the next big thing that came along was gossip. So we enjoyed gossiping about each other. The other thing about us is we grew up or evolved being really curious, because that's how we discovered new lands. The people who discovered new lands and new worlds and new foods and plants, those were the ones that were able to pass on their genes. So we evolved being very curious, but also the tribes that had better social cohesion also survived. So we were not just curious, we were gossip mongers. We were just loving gossip and curiosity. And that's, again, why we love reality TV shows. It's why we're desperate to hear about what other people are up to all the time. But it's also why we judge all the time. Another reason being that, if people do bad things, we would want to judge them, get them out of our tribe so our tribe could succeed. It means that we are constantly pointing fingers. We're pattern seekers too. We are constantly looking, and empathy is a huge part of that. That was a huge part of what they called the status game. There were apparently 3 ways that you'd gain status in a tribe, 3 main ways. One would be dominance. If you're like a big burly bully, that's maybe what they call male, masculine toxicity or toxic masculinity. Sorry, you just get and some women are like that as well, but it's mostly men. They're bolshy and they push around and they get what they want. Another would be success. If you built a wheel or something, that you invented fire or something, not that you can invent fire, people would share their food with you. They go, oh, this guy, keep him around, he's inventing us cool stuff, let's give him some of the food that we got. Now, if you weren't particularly successful and you weren't particularly dominant, that leaves you one other option, which is virtue. You were the nice one. You're the one that shared their food with other people. You're the one that helped everyone out. And that's how you got your share of the food growing up in tribes. So it makes sense that more and more people, especially in today's society where dominance is, so old-fashioned, you can't be dominant anymore. Very few of us are, geniuses like, an Elon Musk or whoever it might be who can invent all this stuff. It means that the rest of us, for our status, are relying on virtue right now. And the only people who are not really that bothered by it are those with a bit of a dysfunction, which would be psychopaths. They don't have empathy. They're not worried about empathy. They will go through their lives trying to climb the ladder and take advantage of other people's empathy, of course. But what a relief it was to have a conversation staring across the screen at, I spoke to a woman called Emmy Thomas. There was another one called Dr. James Fallon, who's a neuroscientist who late in his career discovered that he was a psychopath. And just to have that on the table already, like, okay, you're a psychopath. Great. You're not trying to one up me. You're not trying to beat me in the status game to, back in tribal times, get your share of the food. You've admitted, you've put your cards on the table. You've told me that your status is going to be through dominance or maybe success. I don't need to worry about the virtue. So then we can just have a chat without any of that filter. Of course, I know people are listening on the podcast and all that, but I forget that. I get so into the conversations. I had such a good time talking to them, and I could just... And look, when I'm with friends and we're not being recorded and stuff, I love those conversations. I love saying to a friend, okay, let's say, I'm going to ask you this now, actually, Carlin. Let's say you had an accident or something and they said, right, we're going to have to cut your foot off. The rest of your life, you're going to have your no foot. Or the alternative is there's going to be a horrible natural disaster somewhere else in the world and lots of people will die, but you'll keep your foot for the rest of your life and no one will ever know it was linked to you. What would you do?
Horrible natural disaster somewhere else in the world. No, there's no question in my mind, because I'm not afraid of death and I don't think death is a bad thing. So, I'm fine with cursing a whole bunch of people to death. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. But how much more fun is that? To have that honest discussion with someone, and for us all to go, oh, you know what? We're not all like virtuous Puritans from the 1800s that don't exist. We're humans and we want to survive and we want to do well. And it doesn't mean we have to go, oh no, what aren't we horrible? Because we're not. We do nice things. We save a dog when it's drowning. We look after people we care about. But let's stop pretending we have more empathy than we do. Let's stop pretending and yes, it would be sad. And yes, if you read the news, and even, that's what it is. You see pictures. That's what happened with that Syria war. Nobody seemed to care until they saw a picture. There was a photo of a baby washed up on a beach, and that brought in some empathy. But every single person I've asked so far about the foot thing, and I increased the amount of deaths that it would cause. No one wants to lose their foot. There is almost no amount of death that is enough for somebody to want to lose their foot or their leg or something. Most people would be happy for 5.5, 6 billion people to die in agony, so they would still keep their foot and have a nice life with their friends back in their hometown. And that's nice to have that conversation and for us to be honest with one another. Unless people are now going, God, these two are a pair of psychopaths.
Well, no, and I think that this brings up actually something that I experience a lot on the internet, and I want to go back to it for 1 second. But Brent says, Andrew, you're missing a fourth option for making yourself invaluable to the culture, and that is, of course, a giant penis.
Yeah. Well, that's dominance, isn't it? And another thing I learned recently was that the reason the penis has a sort of bulbous shape on the end, often wider than the rest of the base and the girth and all that, is because it is in there apparently for the suction effect to take out the sperm of any rivals and leave your own sperm in there. So that is dominance. Yeah.
Wow. Fun fact.
I
didn't anticipate learning that today. All right. Fantastic. But I want to go back to this idea of like, of presenting ourselves as like, I guess, a virtuous person, because this is something I have this whole band of people on Twitter who just, they literally live to hate me every single day. Yeah. It's a little bit frightening and scary actually, but they will take literally anything I tweet, anything I put out, and they've started taking to searching like past videos now and like going before I was even like internet famous, which is especially fun, and saying, look, Carlin is a horrible person because she said this X, Y, B, and Z. And like, so my friend Alex and I, we do this stream called Sassy Saturdays, which is like the 7-hour long stream, which, basically we're a little bit bitchy on these streams. That's what it is. Yeah. Oh yeah. We're gonna have a good one on Saturday. It's gonna be great. But like, when we make, remarks about people, and we did one a couple weeks ago saying, basically there was this one woman that she's just really like pent up and hostile. And we said, you know what she needs? She needs to find a man who just ties her to the bed and totally dominates her and releases that energy, like takes her out of control. Yeah. It's this whole theory I have called critical dominatrix theory, which is like people who are really powerful in real life, they need to find some way to balance out that power by being taken out of control. And really the easiest way to do that is by going and getting yourself tied up to something. And like, who do you think really patronizes a dominatrix? It's very high powered, like well-paid men. That's who their patrons are. And so we're like, you know what? She needs a man to like just give it to her. And so the trolls on Twitter were basically like, Carlin's saying that she should be raped. I'm like, I said no such thing. It was like all about consent. Wow. And now they're running around saying you're a rape apologist. And I'm like, dude, I've literally been raped. Like that's actually happened to me. I've talked about it. Like I would never say something like that, but it's like they take it and they twist it in the worst possible way. And then it makes it impossible to have a conversation about anything.
Yeah. The irony being, I imagine these were sort of, again, wokey people, were they?
Oh, there's some of them. Yes, some of them claim to be. The ironic part is that they all claim to be anti-woke, but they're not. They act like woke leftists while claiming to be anti-woke. It's the weirdest thing in the world.
Okay. Yeah, I got that from you, actually. I hadn't thought about it too much, but I know you were saying that a lot of sort of conservatives and right-wing people were woke, and I guess that's a really interesting thought. I suppose what you're saying really is it's the cancel culture stuff, and obviously originally that wasn't even thought of as a lefty thing, but in the US, it was McCarthyism and stuff like that. It was quite right-wing, although it was left-wing with the Bolsheviks and Berlin, that kind of, so you get it on both sides. Just this, the more fervent someone is one way or another, the more they want to cancel other ideas. It's awful, that thing you're saying there, because both of us have now done hours and hours and hours of stuff. I feel bad for that's another issue with secrecy and privacy and stuff, because that whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing.
Oh God. Oh my God.
Well, the victim there, the biggest victim for me was Paul Bettany. Do you know the actor he was in Wimbledon and the Da Vinci Code, English guy? So did you see what he was shown to have written?
I did. What did he write? I don't know.
Shall I find it? Because I want to get it right.
Oh,
Paul
gosh.
Bettany, Johnny Depp. And it's so not fair. I
actually met him. Fun fact, while you're looking for that, I met Paul Bettany at the premiere of A Knight's Tale, which was his first movie in Boston when I was in college.
Oh, that's so
and
funny.
He was there, yeah.
He's English, isn't he? Is he?
He is.
So I'm not so his texts were read out in that thing. So firstly, they talked about Amber Heard's beaver, and then they said, Bettany wrote, I'm not sure we should burn Amber. She's delightful company and pleasing on the eye. We could, of course, do the English course of action and perform a drowning test. Thoughts? You have a swimming pool. And then Johnny Depp wrote, "Let's drown her before we burn her. I will fuck her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she's dead." To which Bettany apparently wrote back, "My thoughts entirely. Let's be certain before we pronounce her a witch." So, like, that is a perfect example. Firstly, they are riffing off of a Monty Python skit, which is sort of a sort of sketch thing that's similar to that. Secondly, like, I don't want a world where you can't say awful things to your closest friends in private, right?
Exactly. That's obviously banter for anyone who's ever had like a friend before. You know exactly what that is.
I can't believe that was read out in court and that was allowed. I mean, it's one thing and I understand why they do that in the States. It's not allowed in the UK, for example, to have those kind of trials that are read out, which is a shame, actually, because we had exactly the same time as the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing. We had these two English soccer football players, their wives were having an argument with each other, a very similar kind of thing, but we weren't able to get the video footage of it because it's not allowed in English courts. I know that they do it in America, and a big reason is, of course, transparency. People want to make sure that everything's, no one's hiding things and that kind of thing. So I do get it, but it does seem a bit much now for like his private messages, he's not even involved in this case, are now read out to the world. And it made me think, God, is anything private now? Is anything secret? Is any message, if I sent you a message now going, God, what a bunch of fucking idiots all those guys watching were, and then you got sued, that's now allowed to be published to the world? That doesn't seem right to me.
No, I completely agree. And it's like, I've had this happen to me where I had someone who I was, I considered friends. I would consider us friends and we were going to start a business together. And then there was a falling out. And I have spent the last 7 months of him posting private messages between him and I on Twitter. And it's like, dude, you have no propriety. This is crazy. And it's like what they do is they take the most crazy out of context things and then twist it to mean it's something it's not. I'm like what I guess I agree with you in that, like, I don't want to live in a world where I can't have banter with someone, which is like what most of those messages were. It was just banter and cracking jokes and things like that. And because the minute that you take that out of context, it looks like something very different than it is. And it's like, why do you want to exist in a reality where you can't have those conversations and you can't make jokes? And it's like, I also think from the perspective on that one, I look at him and I'm like, dude, do you ever think anyone's going to trust you again? Like you've done this, like no one's ever, like you yourself have put yourself in a position where you are never going to be able to have private conversations with someone again because no one's going to trust you to have those private conversations. And what kind of drives people to want to live in this world where they think it's okay to air dirty laundry all over the internet? I don't get it.
Yeah, I had a similar thing with a former Jehovah's Witness called Lloyd Evans. He's one of the sort of the big names on YouTube. I had a big argument with him, and he was threatening to sue me. And I don't usually get. I know you get into quite a few of these feuds. I don't get into so many, although it's happening more and more. I suppose the longer you're online, the more stuff you say, the more arguments you get. Yeah. But he then started releasing messages I'd sent to him, but it wasn't even bad stuff. Fortunately, and because I do sometimes say bad stuff, I could easily message you something like horrible about people. I don't really think, and maybe I need to think more. But he just started. It was just basically me, inviting him on the show and being nice to him, and he was like, "Oh, look, he's nice to me there, but now he's not happy." It was that kind of thing, and it was like, "So what? I was nice to you at the time. What's the big?" But I said, like, I think there is a law against it. I think you aren't supposed to be publishing, especially if you've got a big following, you're not supposed to be publishing messages that were intended to be private. I suppose it depends on the country you're in, the laws.
I did try actually reporting it to the police in the UK, and they didn't want to do anything about that. So that was a nice little adventure for me. Anyway, but like, it is an interesting question though of like what might drive someone to do that? Like what might, like, if you're, because it really is, it's a very deliberate act of trying to take something out of context to make it look like the most horrible possible thing, when it's just like, no, we were just having, like, I was being nice to you and I was inviting you on my show. There's no nefarious intent here. And I guess the question I have, that I have some thoughts around, but I'd like to get your input, is like, why might a person gain value from trying to make someone else, even if they dislike them like a lot, like publicly, like put that person up for shame and ridicule? Because that's really what it is, isn't it? It's kind of like, it's a little revenge porny. It's like you are deliberately putting someone in a position of experiencing public shame and ridicule. And why do you think that is a virtuous thing to do?
It's something very tribal in all of us as well. And one of the things I try to do, and I fail at it, but I try to sort of recognize a lot of this stuff in myself, because to suggest that all these things that I complain about in other people don't exist, at least to some degree, in myself would be, wildly hypocritical. I mean, that's what they would say about themselves. And it is that thing I said about,
Fair enough.
I don't have an accent. I grew up saying like, I don't have an accent, but now I've got YouTube and I talk to people who are from different parts of the world who say, oh my God, you've got an accent. And it's the same thing with, I must have all of these foibles and different variations. And with that Lloyd Evans thing, it was a rare sort of public spat that we had. And it was an interesting thing. I felt those feelings come up in me. And what happened was we were sort of getting along okay. And then I was going to speak to somebody who was on the other side of an argument to him. He said, please don't. And then he started getting very aggressive. I guess he was, I don't know, defensive. And he said, if you speak to this person, I'm going to sue you. If you do this, I'll sue you. You're just a tabloid sensationalist journalist. He started saying these things to me in a private message. And I went so quickly, I felt something come up in me. And I went so quickly from being like, I'm Mr. Neutral, I'm the neutral man, and I'm going to speak to one person on this side, to suddenly being like, oh, fuck you. And instantly I was like, right, fuck you, blocked him, and went and spoke to the person on the other side of the argument. So it was about this whole Jehovah's Witness stuff and some sex affairs he'd had. And I was like reveling in joining in on the sort of anti-Lloyd Evans train, which 10 minutes previous to that, I had been like pretty neutral. I saw problems in what he was up to. I didn't agree with what he was doing, but I didn't have an urge to push him down. And now suddenly I did. And I wonder if it has something to do with the amygdala, or the amygdala, I don't know how to pronounce that right, which is the threat sensor. And I did see, I might have even mentioned it last time I was on, I can't remember. The threat sensor, they've managed to find ways that like these clever scientists, where they numb the threat sensor in people's brains. And they find that people who have got very strong views either way on the political spectrum, and particularly regarding sort of racism and views on immigration and stuff like that, those views go away when the amygdala is numbed. So the threat sensor causes us to have that kind of reaction. And what had happened with Lloyd was he had said to me, I'm going to sue you if you go and talk. I'm going to do this and that. And you're a sensationalist journalist. So he was sort of, I'm going to ruin your reputation. So suddenly my status, my reputation was at stake, as well as my finances if he sues me. And I felt threatened. And I wonder if that feeling of maybe defensiveness or aggression, or that tingle I had in me, was actually threat. I felt under threat, and my only way was to attack. And again, you can imagine a scenario back in Roman times, back in the debate, and where the winner of that debate gets to live his life and the loser has to go to prison, or the gladiators, or just be killed or expelled from the tribe. So I do you think it might be threat? You're feeling under threat?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there is absolutely a part of that. I think, when it first started happening, I did what everyone was like, it was like, just ignore it and it'll go away. And then it just kept happening months and months and months. I was like, God damn it. And so eventually I had to fight back. I had to go and say, no, you are lying. And here, and I'm kind of ashamed of myself, but I also feel like I didn't have any other choice, because I resisted the urge to release the private messages that I'd had between him and I for a long time. Because I was like, this is not acceptable. I'm not playing into this. But it reached the point where I was like, motherfucker, I've got you saying exactly the opposite thing in this message right here, and I'm going to tweet that and fuck you. And
well, that's
it felt
different.
good.
Yeah,
it felt good though. But I do think it was because it just kept coming and coming and coming, and it was like, it's like, when we're coping, there are really like two types of coping mechanisms. This is what I did my doctoral dissertation on. There are two types of coping mechanisms that people use. There's problem-focused coping and there's emotion-focused coping. And the easiest way to explain it is that when you use problem-focused coping methods, you're trying to solve the problem. You're trying to take whatever stressor exists in your life and remove it entirely from your life. With emotion-focused coping, you might be doing things to make you feel better, but you're not actually directly going at the problem. So if I'm in like a really bad job and I hate my boss, a problem-focused coping method would be like, okay, I'm going to update my resume. I'm going to start looking for another job. I'm going to remove this job and this boss from my life. An emotion-focused coping mechanism might be, I'm just going to go work out more, or I'm going to eat a lot of sugar, or I'm going to do things that like make me feel good. but they're not actually fixing the problem that is causing the stress in the first place. And what tends to happen with stressors is people usually, like, when they don't realize exactly what is causing the stress in their life, they're going to revert to emotion focused coping mechanisms. But we can only do those for so long without
Mm.
removing the stressor from our lives. And if we, and eventually, like, just our mind and our body is just going to give up. We're going to get exhausted, and then if we don't take action to remove the stressor from our lives, we're going to end up getting physically sick from it, because what happens in our head makes its way into our body, and eventually emotional unrest or dis-ease will cause actual disease in our bodies. And so
Mm.
with this, for me, I was taking the advice of people, which is like, just ignore it, it's going to go away, just ignore it, it's going to go away. And I think I just finally reached a point where I was like, I have nothing else to give. I need to do something to feel like I'm, you know what it was? It wasn't even about getting back at him necessarily. It was like, I need to regain my power in this situation, because I feel like being put up as an object of public scorn and ridicule for someone who doesn't even honestly have that many followers. Like, his platform is not that big, but he had other people helping him, and they were piling on and all this stuff. I was like, I need to regain my power in this situation, and the only way I could think to do it would be like, boom, you want to release text messages, motherfucker? I will do exactly the same thing to you.
Yeah, well, there you go, isn't it? That's again, it's that status fight, isn't it? You wanted to get more power, and I think that is the human condition. And I think this is why I get frustrated by the woke stuff a lot as well, because it's and that thing of, and it's why I like talking to people who can be honest about just being a human being. Because as
Mhm.
humans, we do want that. We want power. We like to tell ourselves it's because we're such great people. But like, I didn't release Lloyd's messages, which would have actually made him look bad. But that wasn't because I'm such a wonderful person, right? That's what I told myself. But it was because I got the upper hand by being the better behaved person. That's
Mhm.
all it is. So everything we do, a lot of what we do anyway, I'm a little bit of a nihilist in this sense, is for us. We do it for ourselves to make ourselves look good, make ourselves feel good about ourselves. And I like that you described it that way. It's like, screw it, I wanted to have more power over this guy. I did that at that point. The only thing I'd say is, like, my own experience with arguing with like trolls or other people online is like, there is just no resolution. There just
Oh
never
no,
is.
it's
So
never
I've
gonna
just
stop.
started now. I've started ignoring it, and that was really hard for me, because I've got a really this. I've got an urge in me to make everyone, and maybe everyone has this to an extent, but I want them to realize they're wrong. I want them to know why they're wrong, and I want them to start to admit that they were wrong and that they now think the way that I do. I suppose it's this evangelical thing inside me, and after like years online, years of talking to, it's never once happened. So I've never once succeeded. And I just thought, you know what? And someone said, just why don't you just ignore those ones, the trolls or the people having a go at me or whatever, unless they're reaching out with a genuine question. And I have started ignoring them, and I think I'm actually much happier. Do you do that? What do you do with the trolls?
I think for me, I ignore trolls like that are just your average troll. Like, I go through these spurts sometimes where people are posting memes of me online, like when my face photoshopped over a cow or a pig or something like that. Those are real fun. But like, I tend to ignore stuff like that. Where I think where it crosses the line where I stop ignoring it is when they start meddling in my business, and they start meddling
Sure.
actually in my personal life. So in this case, these people have doxed my house. They doxed actually a close friend of mine. They were trying to destroy the career of a close friend of mine. They were reaching out to my community members in private messages. And it was like, I mean, I guess it was that sort of survival thing where I was like, you are you're not only screwing with my income, you're screwing with
Yeah.
my direct personal relationships of people that I love and value and want to be in my life for a very long time. And that's when I start that's when I say, okay, I can't ignore this anymore. This is like, ignoring it has actually caused this to happen. And again, it's like, I hate being involved in these sorts of things, and I kind of wonder, I it because with this group of people, them a lot of times, and I say, actually, the reason that you're doing this trolley crap on the internet is because you don't have something in your life that you're working towards. You're not working towards writing a book. You're not working towards building a business. You're literally just running your mouth on social media all day, every day, living on
Mm.
Twitter. And I really think, I think that first off, I think that Twitter and the positive reinforcement, like dopamine hits that it causes, is a really big problem. I think it actually drives people, like normal functioning people, to levels of lunacy that
Yeah.
I don't see in any other part. And so if people are kind of constantly going for like that like or that retweet, they're going to be behaving very differently than someone who's just trying to be a human being in kind of a weird inauthentic like scenario. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're spot on, and I like what you're saying as well about like I do about the fact that there's an interesting moment when you're a YouTuber and you realize, firstly, that you're going to start making money from this and this is your living, but also, I mean, the responsibility that you have to an extent, right? Only to an extent, insofar as people are going to believe the stuff that you say. People, particularly, Joe Rogan's got millions of listeners now, so everything he says is scrutinized even much more than our stuff is. And if he says certain things about vaccines, I don't know if they're true or not, but people can get, so that's a really interesting thing. Like suddenly it's like you've got this big platform and like, oh God, who's listening? And how am I influencing people and how am I responsible for it? But what isn't always acknowledged on the other side, particularly from trolls, is that since you are now earning your living from this, and since this is how you work and live, they're also responsible for not publicly defaming you. I mean, that's literally illegal. So as much as it might be irresponsible for us, and they say, oh, you're the one who puts yourself in the spotlight, you go, well, yes, but you publicly put yourself in the spotlight by making an outrageous claim, probably in an attempt to make me lose viewers and listeners, which would make it harder for me to feed my family and live my life. It's an open and shut defamation case. And there's been a lot of cases, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter who get this stuff, who get abused like that. I think Stephen Knight is one I really like. I speak to a lot on the podcasts and stuff. And he often gets called a transphobe. And he's just not a transphobe, but he gets called that all the time. So he now replies to, or he did for a long time, just saying, yeah, but I've heard you're a pedophile. And they go, what? You can't just make a claim about me. How can you say that? That's the worst thing. And he says, right, doesn't feel nice, does it? And then, and he threatens to sue them sometimes. It's a weird relationship. Do you know what I mean?
No, I definitely do. And, I kind of wonder, it's like, I never wanted to be like even quasi internet famous. And I don't really think I'm internet famous. Like I've got a decent platform. I've got a bigger platform than many, and I'm blessed in some respects, but I don't really consider myself to be like an internet celebrity or any of those things. And I kind of wonder, like, would I ever even, I've thought about like, if you got invited on these big shows like Joe Rogan, like, would you go? And for me, the answer right now is no, because I actually don't want that level of exposure. I don't want to be at the level that Joe Rogan. I know, I really don't. No. I mean, listen, like I probably have to go because my husband would like murder me if I didn't, I think.
I've got Joe here. He's just here actually. Joe, sorry, Carlin doesn't want the job.
No.
Sorry, mate.
Well, you can take it though, but I legitimately don't want that level of exposure just because I feel like I've experienced so many negative repercussions in my life from having the kind of like middling level of exposure that I have. I mean, would you want to be as big as Joe Rogan is?
I wouldn't want to be as big as Joe Rogan. It's a really interesting point, but by going on his show, you wouldn't become as big as him. You're just
right. Well, fair point.
Maybe, maybe you'd go from 100,000 subscribers to 200,000. And even that's probably, I don't know how much of especially now he's not on YouTube anymore, it's mostly Spotify. So I have heard the effect is less than it was. He's still the biggest in the world. Joe Rogan is something apart as a podcaster because he is so big and so controversial that he's recognized now walking down the street. And that's the kind of fame I think you don't really want. But the kind of fame that some of the biggest podcasters in the world have is actually pretty brilliant. I mean, I just saw Tom Hanks going crazy the other day. Did you see someone bumped into his wife? And it was almost like that Will Smith scene. He was like, get the fuck off my wife. Like really angry. And rightly so, I should say. I mean, everywhere he's gone, that guy, he's enjoyed the good sides of fame, of course. There's two sides to it. But everywhere he's walked for 40 years with his family, there's like 100 people following them with cameras and bumping into them. It's awful. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I think the worst is actually the royal family because they grew up with it. They didn't even have the at least Tom Hanks can go, God, you know what? I did well in my life. Whereas the royal family, it's just like I was born this way and now everyone's following me and this is it. So that's a shit life. But
I would never want to be a member of the royal family, by the way. That I cannot even imagine. My God. They have to
Oh,
behave
yeah.
in exactly the right place, and like the
Yeah.
fact that like, sorry, I know I'm derailing a second, but
No,
like
no.
I'm just slightly obsessed with royal things, and you're British, so I'm gonna talk about it for a
Go
second.
on.
Like I totally was into the Platinum Jubilee stuff, but like you're watching this like little like Louis making these like faces and just acting like a little kid, and
Yeah.
it's like he's not even allowed to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a great point of what that goes back to what you were saying about authenticity, because children are authentic and then they learn gradually. Often they have it sort of almost beaten into them, particularly in the royals, to behave a certain way and to start putting that mask up. In many respects, the royal family is all about having that mask, even though the real them, as we know from Prince Andrew, is not, quite as cordial and polite as you might
Well, and he
hope.
got excommunicated from public life as soon as he did that.
Exactly, that's true. Well, too right. But I mean, where do you? I think a huge part of the enjoyment of life is sort of seeing what you can make with what you have, and moving up if you can in life in ways that you perceive as moving up. It doesn't mean you need to be a YouTuber or an actor it could be whatever it is in anyone's life right now. They have a goal, and it's very sad when you reach that goal. For a long time, that film, the Exorcist film I did for the BBC, I remember that was like, I got so caught up in that for so many years, like filming it, making it, and years trying to sell it, that when it finally got sold, I felt about as depressed as I've ever felt, because it was like, oh, now it's done. And of course, it wasn't like, oh, now I'm Tom Hanks and I'm the huge famous, it was just like, okay, so if I'm lucky, I'll get a second one and a third and a fourth. And
Yeah.
then the people that I look up to a guy called Louis Theroux, or Louis Theroux in American, his name would be. His father's a famous travel writer called Paul Theroux. And he's amazing, and he's hugely famous and successful in the UK, makes these kinds of documentaries. He's made like 50 now or 60. And I just think, is he that excited to make the 61st and to get an extra 10 followers on top of the 10 million he's got, or another million? I think it's really hard. So I think the joy of life is being in that sort of middle point of like, oh, I'm somewhere towards the particular goal I've set myself, but I've still got a long way to go. And if you're born into the royal family, like, you're at the top already, you've done nothing to achieve it. The only way is down. And I think it's quite a miserable existence.
Yeah. I mean, there's a flip side to that though too. And like, so there's a book called The Happiness Advantage that it's basically like a compilation of like all the research around happiness and different things that people don't think about with happiness. And so this research didn't come from this book, but this is just the example that I know it from. And it basically looked at students at like a place like Harvard. And students at Harvard University are clinically depressed at a really, really high rate. I mean, it's somewhere
Hmm.
between, I think the book had at least 50%, but I looked up the number for my book, and I think it's actually gone up to like 75%. And so if you think about that, these are the people that are at the most elite institution in the world. They have every resource available to them. They have every person that they could possibly want to help them be as successful as they want to be. And they're clinically depressed. Well, why are
Yeah.
they clinically depressed? Because they're constantly going to be in this state of striving towards what the next achievement is. Like, these are
Yeah.
kids who graduated in the top 1% of their class, and then they get to Harvard. Well, guess what? 99% of the kids at Harvard are not going to be in the top 1% of their class. And so then they graduate, and they have to go after this perfect job and this perfect family, and they're constantly living in this state of like, how am I going to top this thing that I already did? And
Yeah.
what the happiness advantage more or less is about is, if you want to truly be happy in life, you have to be happy where you are right now. And what people don't realize is happiness is not based on the things that are happening to us. It's based on our mindset and our perspective. So we can choose to be happy even when we're
Mm.
in dire situations. It might not necessarily be easy to choose to be happy, but we can make that choice, and then we can do the work, as the woke would say, to make get ourselves to the mindset and the headspace of being happy regardless of what's happening to us. And my coach always tells me, he's like, even if the trolls are coming after you on Twitter, even if they're releasing more messages, even if they're doing all this crazy stuff, you can still be happy with where you are right
Mm.
now if you make the choice to do so. So it's not about striving for like like what the next goal is or what the next documentary is. It's just about looking at everything you have in your life right now and saying, you know what? Like, all things considered, I'm doing pretty well, and I'm working on things I enjoy, and I'm going to choose to focus my energy on the positive things in life rather than the negative.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to look at it, and I think it's something we can all learn from, isn't it? I think
Mhm.
there's that, and I think there's also like this comparing. We just compare with everyone, don't we? We compare how we're doing to other people. This is what we're talking about with authenticity and inauthenticity on Instagram and stuff like that. But also we compare with ourselves. And apparently, I don't know how, but I read somewhere, I can't remember who it was, but that consciousness, like the state of consciousness, at any one moment, like a moment of consciousness, is said to last 2 seconds, and the happiness of that 2-second consciousness state is often dependent on how good it is compared to the previous one and to the next one. So basically, the way that a lot of us, unless they do perform those sort of mental acrobatics, which I do think we should do, which is what you're saying, which is like, tell yourself you're happy. Come on, just do it. And I do think there is a lot in that. But a more natural happiness that comes to us if we happen to have had a good 2 seconds compared to the 2 seconds before, and so on. And if you are born at the top, that's why it's so difficult, because you'll constantly be comparing to those seconds when you were younger. It's why we all look back so nostalgically at things as well. But also those guys at Harvard, not only were they in the top percent, but I guess because of this, how expensive it is to go to Harvard, right? And the student loans are like, it's crazy. You got to pay. I mean, in the UK, it's a little bit different. You only pay back the loans. Firstly, the loans aren't as big because it doesn't cost as much to study here, but you only pay back the loans once you're earning over a certain amount, and there's no sort of time limit that you've got to pay it back by. So you could go. I've just not done it. I've just been, because I've been traveling around.
Just boycotting student loans. I love it.
I just don't do it. I haven't paid it back, but I've been sort of moving around, and I wasn't earning enough, or I didn't really have accounts. I'm off the grid, but I'm now back in England, so I'm going to have to start, being back on the grid again. But you don't have this kind of time limit. But obviously a lot of people who go to Harvard, the vast majority of them probably are from very wealthy places as well. So it's not even like they could say to themselves like, okay, well, at least, okay, I was always in the top 1% and I'm not anymore in my class, but I grew up poor and now look at all this stuff I have that I can enjoy compared to before. It's just like, no, same as before, same PlayStations as before,
Well, Andrew, we're about to hit our 90 minutes here. Is there anything else that you are thinking about in regards to this conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, there was a bit, I was thinking about parasocial interaction, I suppose.
Oh,
The talk show host. It's this sort of the theory. It started with the talk show host in the 1950s. You'd get people sort of feeling like the talk show host was their friend, and you got that in the movie The King of Comedy, which was Robert De Niro, and then in the Joker movie recently as well, it was also De Niro. That similar thing was happening where the Joker became obsessed with that TV show host or whatever, I think, or something like that happened. Yes, and in the original, the Scorsese movie, it was that De Niro's character was obsessed with a talk show host, because it's a weird thing. It's not something that happened in hundreds of thousands of years of history where one person could talk and the others could hear and listen and laugh and be friends with them almost, but that main person couldn't hear them. So it's very unnatural for us. So that's what we sort of make use of. You and I do it. It's what all of us do. We're doing this parasocial interaction. The difference is where it's evolved in the last few years is we actually get to talk back to the listeners and the viewers and stuff. We comment with them. We share things with them. So it's a little bit more dynamic than what it's been for a long time. But the funny thing is with this sort of, we go back to it, authenticity and us being authentic or inauthentic. It's the viewers don't really have a problem with people being inauthentic because they know that we're not really being ourselves exactly. They know that we've got cameras in our faces and stuff like that. What I've noticed that viewers really don't like is when somebody gives away the game too obviously. So I don't think anyone was really that surprised about the revelations about Ellen DeGeneres, that she was actually a piece of work. Was there even people who loved her, were they really surprised? It's like, come on, you can see that. You can see, but she didn't give it away and we were like, fair enough. Whereas if you see how people talk about Jimmy Fallon, if you hear how they talk about James Corden online, people hate those guys because they give it away too obviously. They don't let us indulge in our moment. We want to pretend that this is all real, and they're not good enough at acting. So James Corden does these fake laughs. Jimmy Fallon's fake laughing all the time, and people can smell it. And I don't know how they're as popular as they are because the internet fucking hates those guys. Whereas Ellen was a bit better at it. But again, you're not surprised, are you, that there was a horrible facade behind her?
No, I think that's a really great point, and I think this is something that I didn't really think about when I first started doing YouTube, was that it wasn't necessarily as much about the content that I was talking about, although I think people were kind of interested and intrigued by my story, but, like, I think it was more about people identifying and, like, kind of, like,
Yeah.
wanting to hang out with you and, like, have a beer, and that's why they listened to the
Mm.
things that you had to say, and that honestly just never even occurred to me. Like, I'm a pretty practical person where I'm like, "This person is talking about something that I'm interested in. I don't need to like them to watch them and to get this information." But I think, the people that have stuck around on my channel for the last 2 years, it really has been more of like, I want to hear what Carlin's opinion on this issue is because I like the way Carlin views the world, and I hang out with Carlin in the Zooms we do in locals and things like that. And it is a very weird position to be in, because the other thing that I found is that with people like that, it's like they identify you personally and they think, I got in a world of trouble with conservatives because they
Mm.
identified me as like a person that like was a friend to the conservative movement because I had been, I left the left on this big spectacle, and I, went on tour with Walkaway, and I did all this stuff to like help them win an election. And then right after the election, when I started actually voicing my beliefs that I'd kind of not really been talking about because it wasn't helpful to the goal I was trying to achieve at the time, all of a sudden it was like a personal betrayal to these people.
Mm.
And it was like the minute that I started saying, well, you know what, I actually am pro choice. Like, I'm not a pro life person. I will never be pro life. I am pro
Mm.
choice for reason X, Y, B, and Z. It didn't even matter that I have a reasonable pro-choice position, or that like I'm not like screaming about like celebrating my abortion and all that stuff. The very fact that I disagreed with them on that one issue made me, it was like a personal betrayal to people who saw me as their friend, saw me as like someone who they would hang out with, who all of a sudden was saying something that they really disagreed with. And those were some of the people that came at me the absolute hardest out of anyone.
Yeah.
And
Because
I
they're
wasn't expecting
betrayed.
that. Yeah, they were betrayed.
It's
I was
so
like,
crazy.
"Sorry, like, I'm a person, and I don't know who you are, internet people. I don't know you personally."
Hmm. But I mean, it's also the fear again. That's that threat sensor because, I mean, if you look at who the woke people, at least maybe in the UK, from what I've seen, who like woke people are most fiercely arguing with, it tends to be sort of center left. Non-woke people, because they feel that threat that they might be convinced by them, by their
Mhm.
arguments, or that others in their group might be convinced by them. And it makes sense. Again, if you're in a tribe, I keep going back to tribes, I'm obsessed with it. But if you're in a tribe and you're worried that other people are going to steal people from your tribe, well, those right-wing people aren't going to steal like my woke buddies, but
Mhm.
the non-woke left-wing people, oh, they could make some compelling arguments about free speech, and how it's important to listen to plurality of opinion. Those things sound nice, and all of a sudden all your friends have left you and gone to another tribe. So I think that's a really big thing. And look, that we complain about those people, and I think we spend a lot of time complaining about like the bad viewers, but we have good viewers as well. And even
Yes.
in this thing, I've got, I mean, I don't know if he's probably is still here, Nosferatu the vampire. He's always in my stuff, and I think we definitely disagree on quite a few things, because I'm the same as you in that I think I've attracted a lot of center right people to my podcast, because I'm so anti woke and anti all this stuff. But my views are actually pretty center left. I mean, they're the same as you on abortion, and the same on. I don't know how you on guns and stuff. Not, I don't have a strong opinion, but often I'll
I'm very
get.
pro-gun right now.
Yeah, yeah, I know that feeling.
You're in the UK though, so you guys don't understand guns.
No, we don't, and that's fair enough, and that's fine. Like, everyone's got to disagree, and I would need to live in your shoes to fully understand. In the States, that's a different kind of thing, and I get that. But there are a few really cool people like Nosferatu and some other people who listen, and they disagree. They'll say, "Hey, I disagree with that," and it's okay. And we disagree, and they're back next time, and that's a nice part of the internet, right?
No, I definitely agree, and I think that for all the people who have stopped watching me because they're pissed off that I disagree with them on issues, it's like I do feel like I've been able to cultivate like a really good community, and it does feel different than other communities and creators that I watch infrequently on the internet. In that we do have a nice chat. There's no disruption. There's no name calling. There's no, because the minute that someone starts calling names and being rude, I usually just block them, and that takes care of the problem pretty immediately. And I think that that's important for creators to do. Is I really do believe that the audience reflects the creator, and that
Hmm.
if you allow anything to happen in your audience, and you just there's nothing wrong with wanting to cast the widest possible net for audience as possible. I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense for people like you and I, because that's how we make ad revenue. So it makes literal sense for us to do that. But at the same time, you're sacrificing something when you do that, in that if you try to be everything to everyone, you're going to be nothing to anyone. And so
Yeah.
I actually like focusing on like a little bit more of a niche community, where at least I feel like I have some control over, the quality of it and the quality of people in it.
Yeah, Ricky Gervais says something like that. I'm always talking about Ricky Gervais. He followed me the other day on Twitter. It was the
How
most exciting.
exciting!
I was just like blown. I was actually doing a call with someone, and I was about to say like goodbye to them. It was like getting to the end of the interview, and you must have that when you accidentally look at your phone. And now I've got a new phone, and it doesn't actually tell me. It just says notification, which is better. Like if I look at my phone now, just say notification on it. But it did say the actual, when I had this phone, it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I had a different phone, it would just say it on the screen. So it just sort of went bright for some reason, and I was trying to talk and do this interview, and I just saw out the corner of my eye, Ricky Gervais has followed you, and I went, oh, and I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the interview, because how can you concentrate when that's, I'm like, waiting to get off to wonder what's going on, and why would he follow me, and what's all this about? And I got off that interview. I was probably rude, because I was just like, well, thank you, bye, and then went on Twitter, and I messaged him and I said, oh, thank you for following, Ricky. Do you want to come on my podcast? And he said a really nice thing that was like, I can't remember what it was, but he, I'm not doing interviews at the moment, but keep doing what you're doing, and I really like what you do and all this stuff. And it was just the sweetest, nicest thing. I love him. But the point was, he says exactly what you say. If you try to please everyone, you'll end up pleasing no one. And I say, you can cast your net wide, but if you look at who's really big on YouTube and stuff, it's people like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. They're huge, and they go down on one side. So people do like that, I guess, right?
Well, here's hoping they do. Well, Andrew, who do you have coming up on your podcast? Do you want to plug anything?
Yeah, I don't even know actually. I talked about them last time because they were just big ones, but it was Amanda Knox was on, and Richard Dawkins. I've got to look at. Do you always? I have 3 people a week now, and so I forget who everyone is. I forget after I've done them. So I'm just looking now. The Sex Cult of Zion. Conspiracy. Oh, the trans wolf girl. That was one I've got coming up. I've met a trans wolf girl who was in that Matt Walsh trans documentary.
God, really?
Yeah, that was What is a Woman? That was a good documentary. How Delusions Can Be Good for Us was a philosopher, Stuart Vyse. That's really good. Someone who was in a Shanghai COVID camp. I've just had somebody who was an LSD mafia boss who faked his own death. And there was Jan Broberg, who's the woman from Abducted in Plain Sight. Did you watch that Netflix documentary?
I did watch that. Yeah.
So the girl who grew up, she's now older. She's Jan Broberg. She was on recently. Molly Bloom recently from Molly's Game. She was on recently. So all different kinds of people. Come to On the Edge with Andrew Gold. Tell me that you came from Carlin's channel, because it's a good sort of starting point to chat, and then I'll tell Carlin, all these people came from your channel.
Awesome. Well, definitely, guys, go subscribe to Andrew's channel. It's really great. His podcast is also available in audio only, I think, on like Spotify and YouTube and that sort of stuff. And all that information is in the description below. Another great chat, Andrew. Thank you for coming on the channel again. Can I invite you back sometime?
Yeah, we'll do it. We should do it like every month or every couple months or something. We'll just chat away. It's great fun.
I think that would be great. Now I'm headed off to the Great Libertarian Festival in the woods next week, so I might have a lot of things to talk about next time. So that'll be fun.
Look out for the bears.
Indeed. Well, we'll have lots of people with very big guns, so I don't have to worry about the bears at all. But thank you so much for joining me again. This was a great conversation, very refreshing, dare I say.
It was great. Have a lovely evening. I will go to sleep.
All right, excellent. Well, let me just shill some stuff and I'll be right back with that. Guys, if you enjoyed this chat with Andrew, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Please make sure you mount that like button on your way out the door. And again, please make sure you subscribe to Andrew's channel. He's got so much cool stuff on there, so many great interviews. I like the cult stuff personally because I like weird things. But I will be back tomorrow, I think, on my second channel, which is youtube.com/actively unwoke. And of course, on Fridays, we do happy hour on that channel. Happy hour is when we watch a woke training and I drink some beers and perhaps get slightly belligerent and do commentary on the woke training to explain to you what is going on in the world and what is happening. If you're not subscribed to my second channel yet, I do hope you do. Not only do I do happy hour on my second channel, but I do also have an audio only podcast that I've started posting on there. It's also called Actively Unwoke. So you can see I have the latest Actively Unwoke podcast here, which is about, it's not about right or left. So you can listen to it on that channel, or you can subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify. So you can find it there too. These are just quick hit podcasts. They're like 20 minutes of me talking about a subject relating to fighting back against the woke or what I think you need to know. So I think that that's something that many of you might find interesting if you haven't found it already. And of course, please make sure to download the audio version of my book, which is now back on Audible. You can find a link in the description, and let me know what you guys think about it. And if you download the audiobook, please make sure you leave a review on Audible, because those really help. Please especially comment on the narrator of the book, who put herself out of her comfort zone to read her own writing. And any writer can understand, I think, why that might be nerve-wracking. But I think it turned out really good. I'm really proud of it, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think. All right, that's all we have for today, guys. We'll see you tomorrow for happy hour. Take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you